The interesting thing about Jesus calling his apostles is we probably, in the eyes of the world, would not have considered most, if not all of them. They would have been disqualified for lack of credentials, lack of learning, previous lifestyle. It's kind of interesting today that Matthew, at the customs post, in other words, he was collecting taxes. The people who would have known Matthew would have looked at him and said, here was a man who sold out. Remember, tax collectors were known not just for collecting taxes on behalf of the Roman government, but they were also known for padding their own pocketbooks. They would overtax, and the excess they would keep for themselves. They lived rather lucrative lives. So really, in the midst of his sin, Matthew, standing at the customs post, Jesus calls him and says, follow me. He doesn't just call him to follow him, he also calls him away from that old life, from those old choices. And my friends, I think that says something very loudly to us today, is that God doesn't call us because we're qualified. He qualifies us because we're called. He knew Matthew had work to be done. As a matter of fact, it says he was sitting there with Matthew and other tax collectors and sinners at table. He met them where they were, and he called them away from their old life to a new life of discipleship. And the people were scandalized by that. Like, look at the company he's keeping. Why do you do this? He frames it in terms of mission. What could really easily be a mission statement for us as church. We're here to call sinners, not justify the righteous. On the one hand, that means to remind each of us to remind ourselves that indeed we are sinners, that there are things that God calls us away from, habits and sins and past things in our lives. God has called us out of that, away from that. But even more importantly, it's what God calls us to. He calls us to live life in the freedom of being disciples, of followers of Jesus, and to do exactly what he did. To not hesitate to go to the margins, to not hesitate to encounter the peripheries, to not hesitate to call others to join him as well. That's the great gift that we see in Matthew, the tax collector. Pretty much in the eyes of the world, he was seen as pretty hopeless, a lost cause. Not to Jesus. Jesus saw him first and foremost as a child of God, and he also saw him as a potential disciple. Jesus called. All Matthew had to do was follow. It's not that much different for us, is it? Jesus calls us. Are we ready to walk away from whatever's holding us back and simply follow him and answer his call? Amen?